Let's turn to 1 Kings chapter 18. First Kings chapter 18. First Kings chapter 18. So we're studying the winter phase of life, and we sort of roughly estimate this about mid-60s to 70 years old to the end of life. And it's a time that the world, I think, kind of dreads in their life, and yet the Christian has nothing but optimism as they go into that latter phase of life. It's a wonderful time. I remember years ago, does anybody know Wayman Jackson? Anybody remember him? Anybody know him? He was at Kingsridge years ago, yeah, wonderful man. Went to his house one time. I was probably 35 or 38. Our kiddos were little. And we went there, and they were just had a wonderful time, wonderful evening. They fed us, and then we sort of had a little fire in the pit there, and we were sitting around talking. And he was probably in his 70s then, and he was a quite successful man, a blue-collar fellow, real down-to-earth, just really wonderful man. And his wife, during the course of that conversation, she said, I love being 60. And as a 30-something, I thought, how could you possibly really love being 60 years old? And I didn't doubt that. She was sincere. I knew that. But, your kids have left home, and you don't have the health that you once had. The youth is kind of gone. You don't have any long-term goals now. Because you don't see people in their 70s, for the most part, starting a different career or starting a family. They don't adopt kids at 70, right? So but as I have grown older, I completely understand that. Maybe not to the degree that I will in even a few more years. I think it is a time when you have a lot of reward for a life well lived if you've tried to live that. What are some of the blessings that you can think about of old age, really? Yeah, I was hoping you'd go for that one. That's the one we had the last week. We had two of them come on the earth, didn't we? Proverbs 17 verse 6 says, the grandchildren are a crown to the elderly. And you think about what a crown is. A crown is something that's given, in honor. It shows position. It shows this element of being admired. It's a wonderful thing. And I think grandchildren, they have a sense of posterity, right? I may not be here in a few years, but my grandkids will, and they can carry on my faith. I think when you have grandkids, it sort of gives you that second chance, maybe to be an influence that maybe you didn't as a parent. My grandmother was a wonderful, sweet lady, but she was not the woman that sat across the dinner table and taught me the gospel, right? She was not the one that, made me get out there and mow the yard or caused me to, you need to learn your memory verse, Zach. She didn't do that. And if she had done that, I think I would have rebelled against that. Her role was very narrow, and she did it just so wonderfully. I remember she used to say, I love you the most. And all of us cousins all believed that meant I love you more than all the other cousins, right? And I don't know that that's what she meant. I think she meant I love you more than you love me. But she let us think that, She used to say, I love you so much it hurts. Oh, man. Now, without her influence, and she was a Christian, we'd go to church together. And I have only been to church with her a few times. They were wonderful memories. But without that influence, I would not have cared what that Bible class teacher would teach me, right? And there would have been some of this sort of maybe apathy or even resentment against folks who were in the church. My brother had a different experience, and he had a lot of resentment toward the church, and he died outside of faith, I believe. We can glorify the Lord in any stage of our life, but the most wonderful thing, I think, is being a mentor to others. And that's what I want to study in 1 Kings 18. We're going to read about Elijah. Let's look at 1 Kings 18, and we're going to start in verse 16 through part of chapter 19. I'm just going to read it. It's a long reading, so just kind of bear with us. Verse 16, so Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all of Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at the Jezebel's table. Stop for a second. That's sponsored religion, isn't it? That is government-sponsored pagan religion. So Ahab sent word throughout all of Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between the two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. I think that's the problem, isn't it? Nobody said anything. Then verse 22, Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood. Put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is God. Perhaps he is in deep thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until the blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued in their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? They've been ignoring the altar. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water, and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it a 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of the sacrifice, and the prophet stepped forward and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. And Elijah said to Ahab, go eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Go and look toward the sea, he said toward the servant. And he went up and looked. There is nothing there, he said. 7 times Elijah said, go back. The seventh time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds and the wind rose. A heavy rain came on Ahab, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Now Ahab had told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. What should he have said? When you think about that, we just slaughtered 400 prophets. We're going to kill you. You're not going to kill us. But that was not he became afraid. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat under it and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread cooked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mount of God. And then he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Lord God Almighty, the Israelites have rejected your covenant and broken down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant and broken down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram, and I'll anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who has escaped the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 of Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. So Elijah went down from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving with 12 pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant. It's a long reading. I appreciate your patience there, but that is such a beautiful story. It's a story of someone who has given it his all in the battle, right? He's in the summertime of life, or somewhat before fall, I guess, at some point. He's fighting the prophets of Baal. He has done a tremendous battle for the Lord. And then he's sort of in transition. He's won the battle, but then he gets afraid. You think about how fear can grip us when we realize our limitations. I think that's kind of what happened. He realized, I can't go on. Right? This is enough. I've had enough. I'm ready to die. And I think what happens often is when we get a little older, we see our limitations and we realize, I can't keep up this pace anymore. I can't continue serving in this role anymore. And you think about, I remember my dad he would go to California and buy cars, ship them back to sell here, and he would put a tow bar on one of his vehicles and put another tow car on the back and tow it all the way 1,200 miles back to Lubbock. I mean, that is dangerous, very dangerous. It's you go through the Guadalupe Mountains, and there's wind, and it's very dangerous. And he used to come when my pickup would break down, which it often did. I would call him, and he would come with a chain and tow me home. No big deal. And I still remember when my truck broke down, and I called him, and he said, maybe you should get a tow truck. Yeah? He didn't want to get on that road anymore with that chain. He didn't like driving on the loop anymore. Things weren't the same as they were when he was 50. Now he was 70, and he didn't have that desire to risk it like that anymore. And I remember I had an aunt. She was a wonderful, dear lady. Probably the reason that I'm faithful in the church today is at least a large part of her influence. She was a beautician, and she loved to do hair. She had all the church friends would come and get their hair done, the curl and set every week. And when she grew older, she couldn't work anymore. And I called her one day and I said, how are you doing? And she said, I'm not good. I can't work. She felt like her usefulness was over. But that was not the case at all. And I think if we're not careful, the winter stage of life, we feel like we're not in the battle. We're not staring down those prophets of Baal anymore. But our usefulness is not over. In fact, it's really, in some ways, it's beginning to take on shape that it never had before. When you're in the battle, you can't pay attention to the individual like you can when you have time. And man, I remember my grandmother's influence even today. And it was such a small time. I probably didn't know her but 6 years, maybe. And not all of those 6 years. We'd have a week, a weekend, maybe, or a week visit. But that influence is profound. And so I think when we're in the winter phase, our roles change. We're not in front of Baal anymore. But we are going to go seek out the Elisha, right? We're looking for the people to influence and to try to bring back up into the Lord and to leave our legacy. I mean, Jim was a master at that. He would pick somebody and start handing them, I want you to lead the prayer. I want you to do this. And he would build someone up to where they could actually lead a little bit, and he knew how to do that. Elijah can't go at the pace he was going. In fact, he hit a wall and sort of just, I think, had a period of some sort of a depression and was afraid. But he was immensely useful. Notice this idea of Elijah throwing the cloak over Elisha. What is that? The sheet, he throws it over his back of his shoulders. What is that a sign of? Yeah.
Or like a relay race.
Yeah.
Passed on
To Elisha. Right?
Elisha got that.
Yeah, there's no question about, hey, this is your coat. Why are you giving it to me, right? He knew what that meant. Now, was Elisha, in 2 Kings, we'll read a little bit about the company of the prophets. Elisha is not in the company of the prophets. He's farming. Did you notice that? God selected somebody that had the heart of a leader. If you notice, what does he do with the oxen? Yeah, sacrifice. Give the meat to the people and burn the equipment, and I'm going. Now, you remember when Jesus said in Matthew, what was it? Maybe it was in, I've lost it for a second. But anyway, Jesus said, you put your hand to the plow and look back. You're not qualified. Is that what Elisha did when he said, let me go talk to my folks and say goodbye? No, that was different, wasn't it? That is not a person who says, I want to go with you, but I really, I want to go back for, that is not what he's saying. He literally wanted to say goodbye to his family. And the reason I know that is, look what he did, after that. He destroyed everything and followed Elijah. So Elisha was picked because of his heart, not because he was in the company of the prophets that was following around. You think about, can you think of another leader who God chose that was not somebody you would think would be a leader? David. Yeah. Why was he not somebody you would think? Shepherd. Yeah. Do we generally pick someone that's, he's been out in the field tending the sheep? What qualities could he possibly have to be king? I mean, that you would think you would want somebody that was politically savvy and had been raised in the household of a leader or something. It's not the one God chose, was it? This idea of passing on that mantle, that is so beautiful. Let's look at, well, hang on just one second. Let me find another thought. There were others that could do the killing of the prophets, weren't there? Elijah, I think, is feeling a little bit like, I haven't finished my job of wiping out the prophets of Baal. There's still some that escaped. And what does he tell him about? He says, Jehu can finish that, right? There are others that will continue on the battle. So, we think sometimes, I think that our influence has to be in the heat of the battle, and that otherwise I'm not useful. I talked to a fellow the other day. He worked for an accounting firm, and he said, our company has a policy of a mandatory retirement age at 65. And I thought, that doesn't seem fair, because you could be really good for a number of years longer. And he said, you can work for us for as long as you want. He said, you just can't be an owner. You can't be a partner past 65. And he said, because what we found is we want the company to keep going. And he said, but accountants will tend to work till they die. And then it just dissipates. The company just goes away because there was no planning. And he said, but you can work as long as you want, but you cannot be an owner. We need to pass that on to younger people that can have relationships with the customers so that when you do die, the company survives, right? So it isn't that they didn't have an influence. In fact, their influence was so strong, a lot of them, they keep them on as sort of an advisor, right? Lawyers do that too. There's a term they call of counsel. You ever seen that? And usually it's an older lawyer. He's not in the firm anymore as an employee or an owner, but he's valuable, right? Because he's got 50 years experience. We don't want to get rid of him, but we need to plan for the new crop, right? And so he has an influence, has a wonderful influence. So Elijah, even though he's not staring down the prophets of Baal anymore, he is going to transition into a phase where he can influence Elisha. Let's okay, let's look at 2 Kings chapter 1. 2 Kings chapter 1. God can use us really at any phase in life, I think. I remember when my grandmother passed away, we had a funeral, and I saw people come to the funeral that I know probably did not know her her whole life. And I think some of them, just from what I observed, were probably healthcare workers. They were people that had maybe been at a nursing home there with her, and had maybe had an influence, that she'd had an influence on them, and they came to the funeral. That a person who is in a nursing home, you don't think they can have that influence, but they can, in a big way. I remember when my dad passed away, the lady called me from the funeral home, from the nursing home. It was really an assisted living, and when he died, she called me, and she cried. She sees this every day, and she started crying because she said he was good. She said he was good, and I thought that was interesting. He had been a good influence. Okay, let's look at 2 Kings chapter 1. and start, let's just start in verse 1. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Now Ahazah, had fallen through the lattice of the upper room in Samaria and injured himself, so he sent messengers saying to them, "Go and consult Beelzebub." Let's do 2 Kings chapter 2, starting in verse 1. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "but do not speak of it." Some versions say, "Be quiet." I think he's irritated with them. This idea of the company of the prophets. Some versions say the school of the prophets. And I kind of think that may have been sort of an understudy, entourage of folks that were learning to be, that were learning from the prophet. But as we said, he did not pick the next leader from that group. Verse 4, Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets of Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know, but do not speak of it." Then Elisha said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "Surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. Did you ever watch a movie and something changes in the presentation of the movie, and there's just something about the scene is a little different, and something's about to happen, right? Either there's music that kind of comes on, or there's just a feeling, hey, this is, someone's going to die in this movie or something. This is the way I always feel when I read this. It's like, come with me. No, stay here. No, I'm going to come with you. He knows what's about to happen. Verse 7. 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. Can you imagine? He has perhaps a lot of things he could ask for. I don't know that wealth was one of them, but if it was, he could ask to be rich, and he didn't ask for that. "I want to be twice as much the man of God that you are." And man, what a wonderful thing to have that influence that people want to be. I want to be like you, only even more like you. This person had a profound influence in his later years. I don't know that have not studied the length of time that they were together when before he was appointed, but this person had a profound influence, even though he was not staring down the prophets of Baal. Let's look at verse 9. When they had crossed, Elijah said, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken? Let me have here in a double portion of your spirit." Verse 10. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to the heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. And then he took the hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left as he crossed over. Don't you know that was a surreal feeling This person that you've admired so much is gone, and now it's up to you to try to do the leading. And the first thing that you attempt works, It's like, man, the Lord is with me, I think. Verse 15, the company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Look, they said, we, your servants, have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley. No, Elisha replied, do not send them. But they persisted until he was too ashamed to refuse, so he said, send them. And they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days, but did not find him. And when they returned to Elisha, who was staying in Jericho, he said to them, did I not tell you not to go? I always thought it was interesting. These company of the prophets, they weren't that smart, right? They didn't get it. He told them it's not going to happen. It's easy for me to see now, really, the more you read about it, why God did not pick the prophets of the company of the prophets, right? He needed somebody with a heart that was different. But that's a beautiful story of someone who is now able to carry on because of the influence of someone, and the influence of that person occurred in the winter phase of their life. When I think sometimes we feel like we've lost our influence, it's even greater at that point. So let's look at this idea of give me just 1 second. The idea of a double portion. Some scholars have studied the miracles, and they have concluded that Elijah did 8 identifiable specific miracles, and Elisha did 16. I mean, it seems as if a double portion, in fact, did reside on Elisha. And God can use us at any point in life. I'd like some input now, just some thoughts. What are your thoughts about the influence of a person in the latter stages of their life? The world does not celebrate that period in life, and yet is it not true that is a time when we can almost be the most influential? Why would you think that you can be the most influential at that point in your life? Yeah. When you're raising kiddos, it's busy, isn't it? And you're making a living. You're working. I can remember a feeling around the older people in my life that they weren't in a hurry. They weren't. You could spill something on their carpet and they wouldn't get too excited about it, right? My father-in-law tells a story. He said, he said, my wife and I would still like to have some new furniture and some nice stuff, maybe a different house. He said, but my parents, he said, they don't care about any of that. They're just more happy just to be together for the time they have. There's something about that sort of, that feeling that I've got lots of time for you. Yeah, that's a good thought. What are some other reasons maybe you can be more influential in the winter stage of our life?
Well, older tend not to have patience to play games. They'll stay exact. It's not really supposed to be accepted. You learn a lot. And there's going to be more on it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let you know.
Yeah.
What's something?
The filter sometimes is not really there anymore. Why filter it, right? What point would it matter? I'm going to tell you what I think. Sort of earned that right almost. Yeah, there's not a lot of pretense maybe at that age. Sir?
I know for me,
Yeah. Yeah, grandparents, mine were simple-minded in terms of things. They didn't have to have a lot of things, And just a beautiful influence. Proverbs 13:22 says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." You know, a lot of times a person in the latter stages of their life, they have accumulated enough to maybe help others. They can be a source of help financially that maybe the parent can't, right? A lot of grandparents have helped their grandchildren financially. I remember when my grandmother passed away, I got $1,200. And that seemed like a fortune to me at the time. But it helped me get a car, and I still remember the feeling that, how sweet that was. That was like a gift from someone that I really loved, What else? What is another reason maybe it can be influential? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. What does a 30-something, nothing wrong with 30-somethings, right? But what does a 30-something know about some things in life, And you can impart that to a kid or to a younger person. I know that my wife and I a lot of times preferred to live to sort of be around people that were a little bit older than us because they knew something. People in our age group would go do something and they were just as immature as we were. They didn't know, how to raise kids any better than I did. And they made the same mistakes with their kids that I was making. But maybe an older person had been down that road, of now's the time you need to give them a hug, or now's the time they need a discipline, and maybe I didn't even know at the time. A lot of experiences, yeah. I think about my grandmother. She lost 2 of her own children, in her life. Well, if that time ever occurs, who do you seek out for guidance and advice? It's someone who's been there, who knows that terrible experience. Life experiences, very good. Can you think of something else? Do older people, are they driven by goals? A person in their 20s and 30s, what are they thinking about? Thinking about, I'm going to start a business, or I'm going to, get married, or I'm going to get this degree, or they've got goals. And those are wonderful things. But do older people think that way? I've never really met an older person that thought, I want to achieve this great thing, right? They sort of were happy with what they'd achieved and realizing that there was no end to that. I can achieve one thing and then I'm going to have something else I need to achieve, right? An old person has learned most of the time, by the time they get old, that that's a never-ending battle and that it's kind of pointless. And they can live in the present, right? A lot of people who are younger can't. God can use us at any time in our life, and I'm so thankful for the older people in my life. When AJ came up and asked me to teach the winter class, he was almost like he was scared to ask me to teach it a little bit, like I'd be offended, and man, what a wonderful time in life to study about and to learn from. And fortunately in Elijah, we have an example of someone who transitioned from that very, very active time in life to mentoring someone else to take his place. It's a beautiful story. Well, I don't have anything else. If you guys have anything else, we've probably got another minute or two, but yes, ma'am. Yeah. No, I don't want to hear it. Yeah. 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 Yeah, there's... Yeah. Yes, it is. Diana said the idea of balancing between saying what you think needs to be said and then not saying too much to push them away because you're not the parent, you know. It's a different role altogether. I think that's probably a big challenge of being a grandparent is, you know, you're making a mistake and you need to hear the truth, but, you know, how do I do that? I can't jerk you up and paddle you because you're not my kid, but although I gave permission to my mother-in-law, you paddle them if they need it. Yes, ma'am.
It's that it's okay to get told everything around. So you gotta do this to be like younger. You gotta
Yeah.
do this, look younger. And we need to tell people that it's okay to be old, to look old. Because you're gonna
Yeah, whether you want to or not, it's coming. That idea of what is it, that gray hair is, what is the verse that talks about it? That gray hair is like a crown kind of wisdom or so forth to a person. We don't think, I mean, we worship beauty and youth in America, don't we? And man, that's sand and not rock, isn't it? It won't last. Will it? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
that will be
Yes. Yeah, that's such that validates that person so well as opposed to, man, you're going the wrong path. Let me straighten you out. Yeah. I remember my dad, when he would discipline, he would say, you know better than that. And the more I think about how positive that was, rather than you're acting like a moron, he would say, you know better than that, right? Well, thanks guys. Appreciate it.